next speaker is Brittany Cole-Bush, who is a modern-day shepherdess, and she manages upwards of 2,000 animals at a time, sheep and goats. I first met Brittany in Bolinas and was just so impressed by her vision of making shepherding a viable career for young people. And I think this speaks a little bit to what Greg was talking about changing our thinking and opening it up, because certainly when I was younger, I don't think I ever thought about being a shepherdess ever. And I don't think it would have been very viable, but she's making it viable. And she just had a big adventure in France and Spain, going to the Pyrenees to learn about how they actually train shepherds and shepherdesses to manage very large landscapes and control fire and so forth. So, Brittany Cole-Bush.
Thank you so much. It's an honor and pleasure to be here. I'm holding my Bible right now. A lot of people are familiar with the word shepherd or shepherdess in the biblical terms. I think Jesus was a shepherd. So I'm glad to come here as a modern day shepherdess. Like Diana said, I am a self-deemed modern day shepherdess, and I call myself this because I've been a part of bringing livestock to the urban peripheries all over the Bay Area, and now I'm working to get it down in Southern California. One of the biggest reasons we do that, we bring livestock down in the urban spaces, is fire hazard reduction. In fact, LA had its largest fire on record in the city boundaries last week. So I'll get a little bit more into the importance of how managed grazing of livestock can be an incredibly important piece in public safety, as well as other ecological tools. All right, I'm going to put my Bible down real quick. All right. So here's an example of some of the work that I've been a part of. Like I said, I bring sheep and goats. I work with large commercial operators of sheep and goats, and we work to bring livestock to urban peripheries. Here is a homeowners association in, I think this might have been Fremont area. So here's another example of livestock in the urban periphery. So how many of you out there have had the sense or notion that livestock are bad? Okay, great. We'll get into why livestock aren't bad, but how it's the management of livestock that can create either positive benefits to our ecologies or negative. And so I hope by the end of this you have some more love for livestock. All right, like I said, there's a plethora of ecological benefits when we manage livestock in very, very carefully ways, and I'll get into that as well. Effective and timely fuels reduction. Like I said, LA had its largest fire to date last week. In the late 80s, some of you will remember the tremendous fires in the East Bay and what devastation it created. The East Bay Regional Parks District started utilizing large herds of sheep and goats to reduce vegetation around infrastructure of the city perimeters in a very timely way. What's the alternative to this method? The dependency of fossil fuel mechanical tools. And lots and lots and lots of human labor. Think about 24-hour workers who just work for food. Here's an example. Invasive species management, job creation, and the agricultural sector support. I'm really excited about the job creation piece because there is a next generation of individuals who do not necessarily want to be inside in front of computers, that want to engage with their environments. And so I'm very grateful to say that I'm a part of a larger community of new grazers working to create new types of livelihoods that are beneficial to our lands and our communities. And community engagement and public education. I've met a lot of people from the city who don't even know the difference between a sheep and a goat. So when we see sheep and goats in public parks, we can start educating youth from inner city situations who've never had that interaction with livestock. And livestock definitely have different behaviors when it's just one or two that you might see at the fair. In a herd, just like us, together we can have incredible impact. And the same thing with animals. And so I would like to kind of invite that idea is that we're actually all part of the same herd. And now we just have to be managed in such a way. We have to do some human herding to encourage all of the positive benefits that I've been speaking of. All right, so here's an example of a fuel break created by sheep and goats. They did this in 2 days, 2 acres in 1 day. And there are homes all up on the top of that ridge, and these animals, carefully managed with electric fence lines, border collies, and skilled herders, were able to accomplish this. Here's the invasive species example. Excuse me. This is another example of large herds in the urban periphery, and look at that guy. That guy was a runner. Can you imagine what the heck that guy was feeling? I told him, just stay put. You'll be okay. I was like yelling. I'm like, just stay put. And these guys ran up around him, and it was not a thing. It's pretty exciting to do this type of work. That right there, that's a mixed herd. We call that a flerd of sheep and goats there's about 700 there. Here's some more examples. And, I'm an advocate for sheep and goats because I'm small and cows scare me. I love cows, though. They do great things. But what I'll show you most of are examples of sheep and goats. They have different impact than cattle do, of course, because of their mass, but cattle are a great, great tool for positive benefit using animal impact. So livestock aren't inherently bad. It's about their management. And that takes a lot of education and experience more than anything to learn how management is so crucial in making sure that the livestock are in the right place at the right time for the right reasons. Also, understanding how the land vegetation needs to rest to grow back to stay away from overgrazing. Understanding ecosystem processes as a grazer is tremendously important because we're managing livestock for not just the purpose of reducing vegetation for fire, of course. We're here because we're talking about soil, and livestock can be a tremendous tool increasing soil organic matter. So we have to understand ecosystem processes as grazers. Here's an example, same landscape, different management. So you can see that it truly is management of how these animals are run through to create different impacts on the landscape. So here's the ecosystem processes that myself and grazers think about and work to understand when we're managing our livestock. So here again are some of the positive impacts through managed grazing with livestock. We can improve soil health. We can sequester carbon, which is an interesting piece that we'll bring back. Two, water retention and forage productivity. And again, as David had pointed out earlier, with a tremendous amount of data, which I very much so value, is that as we increase soil organic matter, we're able to do tremendous things like water retention and, as we saw, incredible forage productivity. So when we talk about grasslands and soil and the relationship of grazing animals on this, it's very impactful. 1 billion people depend on grasslands for their livelihoods, mostly through livestock production for food and fiber. So we cannot turn our heads away from what livestock are to this bigger story. I would say the grasslands can be considered the seas of our land, and of course we are a water planet, like we heard earlier from John, but I believe that grasslands can be considered the sea of our landscapes. So the IPCC estimates that 9 billion tons of carbon is held in these the grassland vegetation, while 295 billion tons is stored in grassland soil. So I'm into grass, but it's really that whole dynamic that this vegetation has with the soil that is what we're very much so passionate about, because this is our solution. So another one of my Bibles is the Drawdown book by Paul Hawkins, but also the Carbon Farming Solution. Who's familiar with this one? This one's a real good one. Okay, all right. So this might be familiar stuff. So science is a really important piece in this. There's a tremendous amount of reasons why, and I'll talk a little bit about the dynamic between science and research and the wisdom of the practitioner, which I believe is really important. But I'm going to focus here on the science a little bit. There is, let's see. For those of you familiar with that work of the Carbon Farming Solution, there is a tremendous amount of work looking at all of the data points of how grazing is a part of the soil story. Because of the variability, there's so many conditions to take into consideration in this research. There is a lot of contention in the scientific community and those on the ground, because those on the ground, based on their management, have been able to see tremendous impacts based on how they're moving their animals about their landscapes. For scientists, it's hard to conduct this type of research with these varying conditions, especially when animals are involved. So this scientific research is really important. In Drawdown, Paul talks about Andre Voisin. He was a farmer and I think he was a farmer and a plant scientist from 1957 in France, and he studied these two variables, how long those animals were in there and the resting time in between those two. Oopsies. He found, his estimations were 1/2 to 3 tons of carbon per acre can be sequestered based on improved grazing methods. But we also have to take into consideration methane and nitrous oxide emissions. Again, with that in mind, and taking that out of the consideration of the 1/2 to 3 tons, because 70% of the world's ag lands can be grazed, there can be significant impact. Gay Brown was already mentioned. Will Harris reports his 1,250 acres of carbon-rich organic matter is 10 times of that of the conventional farms nearby with the same soil type and rainfall. Great, thank you. All right, I'm going to blast through this a little bit because I wanted to get to my shepherding school experience. Again, science, important, married with the wisdom and experience of the manager. So I went to Spain and France with my friend Guido Francini of True Grass Farms of Valley Ford, California, and we went to learn to see how the next generation of shepherds, of grazers, are being trained in Spain and France. It's huge. And a lot of these shepherds and grazers of cows, sheep, and goats, they're coming from the urban centers. So we're like scratching our heads, okay, how can we learn from these folks out there to translate that to a Western United States context? So we went out there through the support of Fibershed, a fantastic organization, that many of you are most likely familiar with. And we learned this guy has been up on this mountain in the Alps of France as a salaried shepherd for the last 40 years. And he shared with me his stories and his experience, both on ecological impact, but then also in cultural impact of his work in shepherding. So we're training they're training a new generation of grazers out there. And what I've kind of deemed this process in context of us out here is new pastoralism. This was a part of our adventure. We traveled in a van for a month through Spain and France, got to see incredible landscapes. This is a young woman from the city who is now training in one of those schools in Catalonia. As you can see, women are a very big part of this, and again, John mentioned how women and children are a very, if not the most important kind of people out there in making this change happen. So proliferation of female shepherds is certainly true, and I want to respect your time, so I'll kind of move through. Very passionate shepherd right there. He was a hoot. So I'm showing you a lot of French sheep. These are salaried French shepherds, and we got to shadow them on their daily circuits. Notice no fences. This was a Basque family that were cheese producers. So how can we translate that into the urban context I was just mentioning? I've been thinking, who could be a new demographic of non-traditional agrarians that could impact our urban areas? So globally, we're seeing folks move to urban areas, right? Well, the urban areas have open space peripheries. Who can we think about being trained as these new shepherds or ecological doctors, as my friend Fred Provenza likes to call us? California Conservation Corps, previously incarcerated individuals, refugees and immigrant groups, and urban core inner city youth at risk. All of these folks, thank you, have the potential to be trained to manage livestock in a very carefully way. Of course, there's a lot of training involved in that, to protect our urban peripheries from fire, but then also be a part of all of the ecological benefits, including perhaps restoring some very, very sick and denuded landscapes. So while I want to invite you to give me more ideas on communities and groups that could potentially be trained here in the Western United States to become modern-day urban shepherds and shepherdesses and grazers. And I'm going to be giving a free webinar to give the summary of what my findings are, and then also to begin to bring recommendations of what a grazing school, very similar from the schools that I visited in Spain and France, how that could proliferate a new demographic, a new community of these types of folks on the land. So thank you very much for your time.